Hey, this is Ben, and I want to talk to you today about arguments and arguing with people. Now, I think we all understand how arguments can be really, really, really bad and not good, and um, yelling matches. Like, here's an example of a bad argument. Um, I had my old boss um got in trouble with the city for having too much equipment and like stuff going on at his house where he lived, and it was in the city limits, and you couldn't have like all this logs and chainsaws, and it was like a construction site permanently. It was like an industrial park, but he lived in like a small neighborhood, and it wasn't zoned for that. He couldn't do that. So the neighbors complained, and he had to move all his stuff. So then he like overreacted, and like he wouldn't let. We still met there to drive off to like go to work. He didn't want the employees parking there, and so I live like a few houses down. So I just, I didn't really park at his house. But there was one employee. It was just me and one other employee, and he like would park there, and then we would meet up and drive off with the lawnmowers and stuff and go off to work. And like he told that guy that he has to park at my house and walk over, and it was just funny the way the thing went. So like that guy just refused to do it, and so finally one day they butted heads over it, and somebody had to call somebody out, and it was just funny because they both been complaining to me about it without talking to the other person that they were really mad at, and they had their argument, and it was amazing. They they didn't really even make points. They just started using swear words and cuss words, and like I'm someone who needs to be better about not using those words. Like I use them not like without thinking about it, without not even to like make a point. It's just like hard for me not to use them. But like they uh they just started cussing at one another, and like they never even really debated the pros and cons of like should he park two houses down and walk, or is that a pointless thing, but also it's not a big deal to walk two houses. I mean, it's really a debatable question. Like, what should you do? What difference does it make either way? How can you say one is better than the other? But like, they just started cussing at one another, and it got to a point where whoever cussed the most and the most ferociously, that's who won. And like, my boss like just cussed more and more ferociously, and the other guy just eventually just backed down, and that's how they resolved it. Insane, you know. And I mean, and just yelling and cussing till that. I mean, it was like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, um, I'm just trying to give you an example of a bad argument. Now, sometimes there are arguments that we feel like don't go well, but maybe they do. Um, and for a different example, um, there's a girl I know, and I guess she has a tendency maybe to want to argue with people, but it's not always a bad thing to argue with people. And I think she got in her mind, or maybe someone put in her mind that she should never do that, or it's wrong for her to do that. But like, I wasn't so sure it was such a bad thing. I think and so like, you take for she was arguing with someone, and like it got pointless and stupid and nasty, you know. And the hard part for girls is that there's this intense need to be attractive, or to feel attractive, and that makes things difficult because when you're in school, being smart gets you approval, it gets you acceptance, it makes you attractive. But when you're out of school and when you're an adult, being smart makes people mad at you because you're the one who's going around correcting other people's confusion and errors and mistakes. And so, I mean, I don't know for sure, but that would be a pretty good explanation for why every high school graduation you've ever been to, the valedictorian and salutatorian, or at least one of them, always a female. I mean, there's rarely a male. Girls always make incredible grades, you know, but after school they're not dominant intellectually. I don't want to say that girls are any dumber than guys, but even outside of school I wouldn't say that. But what I would say is they're clearly dominant in school. And what happens? Why aren't they just in charge of everything? Well, one explanation could be that it's attractive to be smart in school, but it's not attractive to be smart when you're an adult. And that's an important life skill that I think sometimes mamas and other girls, they push girls not to learn, how to argue effectively, because it's super hard, and a lot of times you just fail. I don't know how many times I've tried my best to reason with people, and you can tell if you look on my channel, that's a big thing that's important to me. I'm gonna make a lot of people mad, make a lot of people upset at me, but like, I'll just not be attractive. They can just not like me, because some things have to be said. And what I find and what I found with this girl is like, yeah, the other person online was mad at you and didn't want to agree with you, and maybe y'all aren't friends anymore. But guess what? That other person changed her view to yours. You're doing good. Think about how much time in life, like think about, for example, the 2016 election that we have here in the United States. Most people are saying, oh my goodness, people are so stupid. Like, look at the stupid ideas coming from candidates that people are just, hooray! Like, there's so much stupidity out there, and it's always that way. But if you're not going to do the dirty work of trying to teach people the right way to think, show people the truth, reason with people, debate people, then you don't get it right to complain that everyone's stupid. You're just going to sit there in your little smart cave and be smarter than everyone else. That's not the way of love. Love means you do what benefits someone else, even if it costs you. That's what Jesus Christ was all about, right? He died for our sins. He did what was best for us. He never backed off telling people what they needed to hear. And he made some people very mad at him. But honestly, he was as tactful as you could be. And there was never a good reason to hate him. And so we definitely need to think about his example. He said you need to be as innocent as wolves and as crafty as serpents sometimes. And some of this, and I'm going to give some tips, just a few pointers. I mean, if you want to look up a good thing about this, then go to bethinking.org and look up Logic and Fallacies and Thinking Clearly with Michael Ramsden. And it's a helpful little seminar. But there's a few things to think about. One thing is, take some time to learn logical fallacies. Just like the informal fallacies. And a fallacy just means like a way that someone tries to prove something that falls short, but it seems like it proves it. And you encounter this all the time in your life. And you don't really need to learn logical fallacies to be able to reason with people. What the fallacies become for you is listening tools. Tools that help you listen better. So that when someone says something that's a fallacious form of reasoning, you can just hear, okay, they just did special pleading. Keep talking. Because you're not overwhelmed with how wrong the stuff they're saying is. You can just listen. So you don't want to go around saying, you committed this fallacy, you did special pleading, and you did begging the question, and you did a red herring, and you did an ad hominem. You don't have to. That's not the point. The point is for you to be able to organize in your head more easily and quickly what's going on with what the person is saying, so that you don't have to, think it through so much, and you don't have to interrupt them to keep your thoughts straight and to keep from being confused by them. You just you can just listen to them and hear them out, because sometimes there may be something to what they're saying that you might miss because you get caught up on something wrong with what they're saying. And one of the most important fallacies that's hard to recognize is ambiguity. Ambiguity is one of the main ones, of all the fallacies. Please don't miss that one. Ambiguity. And what that means is someone makes a statement and it's clear what they said, but it is not clear what the meaning of what they said is. unrecognized ambiguity, especially, when in text and email, because we never use correct punctuation and grammar. It causes so many arguments, and it'll cause like arguments where you're just going back and forth, and each person keeps repeating themselves, and you just get exhausted, and you give up, and you go home. It's because you weren't really understanding what the person was really saying, because they were making ambiguous statements, and maybe you were too. An ambiguous statement is a statement that can just go, there's two ways to take it. There's more than one ambiguity. Okay, so here's an example. Someone said this to me today. There was something that, that was done in an organization that he's part of, and he asked me, should I be upset about, and then went into a long explanation of the thing. You see the ambiguity? Define, what do you mean upset? Do I want you to burn the office down? Is it because that's in one sense upset, and or do you want to, what do you want to do? And so I let him explain the situation. I said, okay, now, because I recognize the ambiguity instantly. Like he just said upset. Like, what does upset mean? Some people get upset and they go in the bathroom and read a book, and some people get upset and they lose their job because they got mad at everyone. Or I know one guy who got upset at Georgia College, and he said he was going to stab his boss in the neck with a screwdriver. He wasn't really, but they thought he was, so they put a restraining order on him and told him he couldn't come back to the campus. Needless to say, he was also fired. So what does upset mean? And I said, what does it mean to you? And he said, well, I just, make a fuss and make a big stink in front of everyone. And it's like, immediately I thought, okay, is he doing that just because he wants to, have attention, or just some drama or something? Or does he really, is this, and so once I understood what he meant by upset, then I just said, well, what do you think really needs to be done? And then he would just drop conversation. I said, that's the real question. What do we really need here? What is needed? But unrecognized ambiguity. Learn logical fallacies. Learn to ask questions. So that instead of just telling people what they need to think, even when they're asking you, that is the trick. You have to be careful. Like I did in this situation I just told you about. Even when they're asking you what you think, be careful. Don't just tell people what you think. Figure out what's going on with them. Don't fools rush in, right? Is that a movie? Sounds familiar. Anyways, but that's my point. And also, like this girl, I'm not sure if she recognized, sometimes people don't admit you were right, and they'll be mad at you forever and won't be your friend forever, but you will teach them something. And sometimes that's worth it. And they will change their view. It can get creepy. And it gets creepy sometimes because I've heard someone that completely disagree with me, and later on I'll hear my exact words coming out of their mouth. And that I'm not comfortable with that, because I want people to take in what I say and understand it for themselves and really agree with it or disagree with it, but not just copy me like a slave. I'm not comfortable with that. That's very scary. And I get obsessed with explaining things as clearly as I can. I mean, I have a YouTube because I'm just I have this inner need to just explain. I mean, I drive around all day, and I work all day, and I'm by myself, and so I always just pretend there's someone there, and I'm just explaining everything to that person, and that's how I can't help myself. I'm a nut. But the point is that sometimes, I don't know if you've seen The Wizard of Oz. You always ask yourself, well, why couldn't they couldn't just tell Dorothy from the beginning, from the get-go, right there in Munchkin Land, just click your heels together, Dorothy, 3 times and say there's no place like home each time, and you'll just magically return to Kansas. And sometimes, I was watching this, and my aunt was just like, yeah, I don't understand this movie. And I was like, if you just listen to what Glinda said, Dorothy could never understand that, and the magic would never work for her unless she truly understood that there really is no place like home, and that's really where she belongs. And sometimes there are some points you can't understand unless you think about them and figure them out for yourselves. There's no way a person can make it plain to you or explain it to you and just say it to you. You won't get it. You have to think about it for yourself. And there's just some points in life that's how they work. And so sometimes helping people understand is more about saying something to them that they'll think about later. So that's important too. But yeah, there are ways to be more careful with people so that you don't make people mad. And when you learn logical fallacies, a lot of times what you learn is like the person's motivation. And the person's motivation and why they're arguing with you is important. Because some people, they don't really want to talk about, they're pretending that they want to argue with you because they're real concerned about this thing. And a lot of times they're not. They just want to argue with you because maybe they want to put on a scene. Maybe they're mad at you. Maybe there's something else that's really bugging them. Maybe like they're like my dad and they just love to argue and just for the sake of argument, and they just enjoy it. And so what you can do sometimes is ask them a question. Like if they get mad at you and tell you, you're not a good Christian or something like this. Sometimes the best thing to do is just say, well, what do you think a good Christian is? And see, that will reveal what their motivation is. Because if they really are motivated by a concern about you being a good Christian, then they'll launch into what they think a good Christian is. But if they just have a beef with you for some other reason, and they're coming from a very negative, evil place in their heart, then they won't want to talk about that, because then they're going to be saying positive things. And they don't want to introduce that dose of positivity into the conversation. Yeah, so if you have someone who just wants to dump on things, sometimes it's good to ask them, hey, well, what do you think we should do? Sometimes that's not the best thing to do. And now, here's a few examples, and we'll end with this. Certain logical fallacies reveal like a person's where they're coming from. So, for example, like a slippery slope. It's like the mama fallacy, right? She finds her kid falling asleep while he's doing his homework. She's like, oh no, I'm raising a delinquent. He's going to be a criminal. Like, nah, lady, like you took that way too far, way too fast. Like, a slippery slope is the idea that if you take one step in a certain direction, you'll take every step in that direction. So, like, it's like, there was some TV pundit who was saying that, like, if we do anything in common with the communists, then they're just moving America to communism. It's like, no. Why? Just because you take one step in a certain direction doesn't mean you're going to take every step. You have to justify that. That's the slippery slope fallacy. But the thing about the slippery slope fallacy is that it typically it's used more just to emotionally charge up someone who already agrees with you. It's not an intellectual fallacy. So if someone's coming at you with slippery slopes, it's more of a heartfelt thing for them, and they don't need you to argue with them. They need a hug. You know what I mean? They need you to just care. They're not intellectual. But if someone's coming to you with like a false dilemma, then that's an intellectual problem. You need to reason with that person, because that's mental. So look up false dilemma, you'll see what I mean. Or maybe a complex question. Then yeah, if someone's coming to you maybe begging the question, then that reveals to you that everyone around them, and typically that means they never hear anyone who thinks anything other than this way. And that's all they hear is people who think that way all the time. So, a question beggar, they only read books and talk to people, and everything is just 100% that view. And they've lost the ability to even question that view. And that's what begging the question means. It is a fancy way of begging someone not to ask a question. In other words, like, they just can't question it. And when you question it, they answer by just saying, I'm right, and the reason I'm right is because I'm never wrong. And so they just say the same thing twice with the word because in there, and the word because somehow makes the second time they made their claim a proof of the claim. But it's not. It's just, I'm right because I'm never wrong. That's begging the question. And it can get fancy, so you need to think about how to recognize it. Like I remember one guy, he said, you should always be at work 15 minutes early. And I said, well, I don't know if that's true. I mean, most places I've worked, they didn't really care as long as you were on time, maybe 5 minutes. But like there was no need to be 15 minutes early. And people who work for me, as long as they're on time, I don't care. And he said, well, you can never work for me then. You see, that was a pretty fancy way of begging the question. Special pleading is the last one we'll talk about. Special pleading is when someone just has an agenda, and when they make a special pleading argument, they're not really revealing the real reason why they think what they think. They're giving you a different reason. So an example of this would be like if you play your brother in Nintendo game, like 10 times, and you beat him 9 times, and then the 10th time he beats you, he says, I'm better than you, and you say, why? And he says, well, I beat you. I beat you. And like he's ignoring all the 9 times you beat him and just only focusing on the 1 time he beat you. That's special pleading. They're picking the facts that they want to remember. They never lie. When someone's special pleading, they're not lying. They're just ignoring, it's half truth. It's just half the truth. And that's usually means they've got like an agenda to prove a certain point. They've already made up their mind that they want to prove the point before they ever enter into it. So that helps you know like where they're coming from and how to deal with it. Like this person's just a fan of this. Like you see it more in sports. Like they're just a fan of this team, so they're just going to list out the good things about this team and the bad things about the other team. When in reality, there are good things and bad things about all the teams. You see it in politics, you see it in whatever. So, I mean, I hope that this video didn't run on too long and that it's helpful. It's good to argue with people because it's your job to love people enough to want to help them think clearly. We talk so much about spiritual battle, but we got to think about there's a spiritual battle going on for people's minds, and we need to engage in that battle, and it may cost us something. And we may make mistakes, but we have to do it. We have to. And, pray up. What can I say? If you're really going to mess with it, you're going to have to you're going to have to go in there with the right motivation. But Jesus, he got crucified, so don't, if you're really on the warpath for Jesus, like I heard today, you're not going to get opposition from the devil as long as you're doing everything he wants. But as soon as you oppose what he does, expect problems. That doesn't mean that just because you have problems in your life that you're doing the right thing. Because that's karma, and But if you are doing the right thing, the devil is going to give you problems. God may, who knows what he's going to do? He's God, right? He's smarter than us. But there's an enemy. So it's just something to think about. I hope this video didn't run on too long. Jesus loves you.